For 15 years, a man remained silent, trapped in a vegetative state. A new nurse was hired to take care of him, and soon realized that something was wrong. Dark secrets lurked within the mansion, and someone would do anything to ensure the truth was never revealed. But when an unexpected ally emerges, the fight for justice and redemption takes a surprising turn. Before listening to this story of courage and overcoming adversity, don't forget to like and share this inspiring tale. The bus stopped in front of the imposing iron gates. Emily Adams, the new nurse, adjusted her uniform and took a deep breath as she faced the mansion at the end of the stone path. At 28, she had already worked in several hospitals, but this job was different. The salary was 3 times higher than her last one, and she desperately needed that money to help with her mother's treatment. With hesitant steps, Emily approached the security booth. A burly man, wearing an impeccable black suit, examined her credentials with a penetrating gaze before gesturing for her to pass. The creaking of the opening gates echoed through the air, sending a shiver down the young nurse's spine. The stone path wound through meticulously maintained gardens, with elaborate topiaries and murmuring fountains. The grandeur of the property made Emily feel small and insignificant. As she walked, she couldn't help but notice strategically positioned security cameras, their electronic eyes following her every movement. Upon reaching the main entrance of the mansion, Emily was greeted by Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper. She was a middle-aged woman, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun and a severe expression that seemed carved in stone. "Miss Adams, I presume," said Mrs. Eleanor, her voice as cold as her gaze. "Follow me, please. I'll take you to your workstation." Emily nodded, swallowing hard as she followed the housekeeper through the luxurious corridors of the mansion. The interior was a dazzling blend of classical architecture and cutting-edge technology. Oil paintings of austere ancestors silently observed from their golden frames, while state-of-the-art security systems blinked discreetly in the shadows. "Your patient is in the East Wing," Mrs. Eleanor informed her, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. "Mr. Richard Morgan has been under our care for 15 years. His condition is delicate." Emily frowned, intrigued. 15 years. That's an exceptionally long time for... "We don't ask questions here, Miss Adams," Mrs. Eleanor interrupted abruptly. "Your job is to care for Mr. Richard, nothing more. Dr. Bethany Morgan, his sister and the head of this house, doesn't appreciate excessive curiosity." The warning tone in the housekeeper's voice was clear, and Emily decided it would be better not to press the issue, at least for now. They continued in silence until they reached a set of solid oak double doors at the end of a long corridor. Mrs. Eleanor typed a code into an electronic panel beside the door, which opened with a soft hum. "This is Mr. Richard's room," she announced. "All necessary medical equipment is at your disposal. Your shift will be 12 hours with Sundays off. Any questions?" Emily looked around the spacious room, absorbing the sight of monitors, ventilators, and other advanced medical equipment surrounding the bed in the center. Lying motionless was her patient, Richard Morgan, a man who appeared to be about 50 years old but whose expression was surprisingly serene for someone in a vegetative state for so long. No questions for now," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good," said Mrs. Eleanor. "Remember, Miss Adams, discretion is the watchword in this house. What happens here stays here, understood?" Emily nodded, feeling a knot form in her stomach. There was something about this situation that didn't seem right, something beneath the polished and luxurious surface of the Morgan mansion. When Mrs. Eleanor left, closing the door behind her, Emily found herself alone with her mysterious patient. She approached the bed, carefully observing Richard's face. For a moment, she thought she saw his eyes move beneath his closed eyelids, but convinced herself it was just her imagination. As she began to check Richard's vital signs and familiarize herself with the equipment, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had embarked on something much larger and more complex than a simple nursing job. Mrs. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. "We don't ask questions here." But Emily had always been naturally curious, and something told her that the right questions could reveal secrets that the Morgan family was desperate to keep hidden. With a determined sigh, she focused on her tasks, promising herself that she would discover the truth behind Richard Morgan's mystery, no matter the cost. What she didn't know was that her search for answers would lead her into a labyrinth of family secrets, conspiracies, and a discovery that would change not only her life, but that of everyone in the Morgan mansion. The days passed at the Morgan mansion, and Emily began to adapt to the routine of caring for Richard. However, the more time she spent there, the stronger her sense grew that something wasn't right. Small details, whispered conversations, and furtive glances from other staff members fueled her curiosity and suspicion. On a particularly sunny morning, Emily decided to take Richard out to get some sun in the mansion's inner garden. As she pushed the wheelchair through the corridors, she noticed the apprehensive look of one of the maids. "Good morning," Emily greeted with a gentle smile. "The weather is beautiful today, isn't it?" The maid, a middle-aged woman named Connie, nodded nervously. Yes, very nice, but are you sure you can take Mr. Richard outside? Dr. Bethany." Dr. Bethany approved, Emily lied smoothly, feeling a twinge of guilt. "A little fresh air will do him good." Connie seemed to want to say something more, but merely bit her lip and hurried away. Emily frowned, intrigued by the maid's exaggerated reaction. Why did everyone seem so tense when it came to Richard? In the garden, Emily positioned Richard's chair in the shade of a leafy mango tree. The aroma of flowers and the soft murmur of the nearby fountain created a peaceful atmosphere. She sat on a bench beside him, enjoying the moment of peace. "You know, Mr. Richard," Emily began to speak more to herself than to her inert patient, "there's something very strange going on in this house. Everyone seems to be hiding something." At that moment, she noticed a slight movement in Richard's fingers. Leaning in closer, she watched carefully. Yes, there was no doubt. His fingers were moving almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Richard?" Emily called softly, her heart racing. "Can you hear me?" There was no response, but Emily was sure of what she had seen. This small movement contradicted the diagnosis of deep vegetative state that appeared in the medical records. She needed to investigate further. Returning to the room, Emily began to carefully examine Richard's medical records. The more she read, the more confused she became. The reports were inconsistent, with inexplicable gaps and subtle alterations. Over the years, one detail in particular caught her attention. 5 years ago, there was a significant change in Richard's medication administration. Coincidentally, it was at the same time when, according to the records, Dr. Bethany took full control of the mansion and the family business. Emily was so absorbed in her investigation that she didn't notice the approaching footsteps. The door opened suddenly, making her jump in surprise. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Eleanor's cutting voice filled the room. Emily tried to hide her nervousness. "Just reviewing Mr. Richard's records to better familiarize myself with his medical history." The housekeeper's gaze was icy. "Those records are confidential, Miss Adams. Your function is to care for Mr. Richard's current well-being, not to rummage through the past." "I'm sorry, I just wanted to better understand." "Understanding is not part of your job," Mrs. Eleanor interrupted harshly. "Make sure this doesn't happen again, or I'll be forced to inform Dr. Bethany about your excessive curiosity." With that, the housekeeper left the room, leaving Emily with a feeling of discomfort and apprehension. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she couldn't ignore what she had discovered. Something wasn't right with Richard Morgan, and she was determined to find out what it was. That night after her shift, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind was buzzing with theories and questions. Why keep Richard sedated for so long? What was the family hiding? And most importantly, was Richard really in a coma, or was he trapped in his own body, aware of everything around him? Determined to find answers, Emily planned her next move. She needed an ally, someone who knew the history of the Morgan family and could provide information that the official records didn't show. She then remembered seeing an elderly man tending to the garden, someone who seemed to have worked at the mansion for a long time. Perhaps he could shed some light on the mystery surrounding Richard Morgan. With this plan in mind, Emily finally fell asleep, not knowing that her search for answers was about to take her down a path of no return, filled with shocking revelations and unimaginable dangers. The next morning, upon returning to the mansion, Emily was determined to find the old gardener. She knew she needed to be cautious, as Mrs. Eleanor's eyes and ears seemed to be everywhere. Taking advantage of a break, she headed to the gardens, pretending to admire the flowers while discreetly looking for the elderly employee. It didn't take long to spot him, carefully pruning some bushes near an ornamental fountain. "Good morning," Emily greeted gently, approaching him. "What a wonderful garden you tend." The gardener, a man with white hair and a face wrinkled by the sun, raised his eyes from his work and smiled. "Good morning, miss. You're the new nurse, aren't you? Pleased to meet you. I'm Jack." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Jack. I'm Emily," she responded, instantly feeling at ease with the gentleman. "Have you worked here for a long time?" Jack let out a soft laugh. "Ah, my dear, I've been in this house since before Mr. Richard's birth. I've seen a lot happen around here." Emily felt her heart race. This was her chance. "You must have many stories to tell then." Jack's gaze became distant, a shadow of sadness passing over his eyes. "Yes, many stories. Some happy, others not so much. But you know how it is. Some things are better left in the past." "I understand," Emily said carefully, "but sometimes knowing the past can help understand the present, don't you think? Especially when it comes to caring for someone." Jack observed her attentively for a moment, as if assessing her intentions. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he spoke in a low voice. "Look, girl, if you want advice from an old man who's seen a lot in this life, some stones are better not to be turned. What happened to Mr. Richard? There are things there that—" He was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Mrs. Eleanor appeared around the corner of the garden, her sharp gaze fixing on Emily and Jack. "Miss Adams," the housekeeper called with an icy voice. "Your break is over. Mr. Richard needs your care." Emily nodded quickly, casting one last meaningful look at Jack before walking away. The words of the old gardener echoed in her mind, fueling her determination to unravel the mystery that surrounded Richard Morgan. As she walked back to the mansion, under Mrs. Eleanor's watchful eye, Emily knew she was getting closer to something big. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the complete picture was still far from being revealed. What had really happened to Richard? Why did his family seem so determined to keep him in that state? And most importantly, what would happen if the truth came to light? Emily knew she was risking not only her job, but possibly much more by continuing her investigation. However, something inside her urged her forward. She had the feeling that Richard somehow needed her, and she wouldn't abandon him, no matter what it cost. With this firm resolution in her heart, Emily entered the mansion, ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. Little did she know that her actions were about to trigger a series of events that would forever change the course of many lives, including her own. Days turned into weeks, and Emily felt increasingly involved in the mystery surrounding Richard Morgan. Each shift at the mansion brought new questions and few answers, but she was determined to continue her discreet investigation. On a particularly busy afternoon, Emily was performing routine procedures on Richard when she noticed something unusual. The patient's muscles, which should have been severely atrophied after 15 years of immobility, seemed to maintain a surprising tone. Intrigued, she began to examine Richard more carefully. It was then that she noticed something even more disconcerting. There were subtle marks on his wrists and ankles, as if he had been restrained recently. "What's going on here?" Emily murmured to herself, feeling a chill run down her spine. At that moment, the door to the room opened abruptly. Emily spun around, startled, to find herself face to face with a woman she had never seen before. Tall, elegant, and with a penetrating gaze, she exuded an aura of authority that made Emily instinctively step back. "So you're the new nurse," the woman said, her voice cold and calculated. "I'm Dr. Bethany Morgan. I see you're examining my brother quite thoroughly." Emily swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "Dr. Morgan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Yes, I was just conducting a routine assessment." Bethany approached, her heels echoing on the marble floor. Her eyes, the same color as Richard's, studied Emily with an unsettling intensity. "Mrs. Eleanor informed me that you've been showing an unusual interest in my brother's case," Bethany commented, her voice carrying a veiled threat. Emily felt her heart race, but she remained firm. "I'm just trying to provide the best possible care, Doctor. The more I know about Mr. Richard's condition, the better I can serve him." A cold smile curved Bethany's lips. "Admirable, really. But let me be clear, Miss Adams. Your job is to care for Richard's current state, not to question the past or speculate about the future. Understood?" "Perfectly, Doctor," Emily replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Bethany cast one last penetrating look before turning to leave. At the door, she paused and added over her shoulder, "Oh, and Miss Adams, remember that excessive curiosity can be dangerous." With that, she left, leaving Emily with a feeling of ice in her stomach. Bethany's warning was clear, but it only served to strengthen Emily's determination. Now, more than ever, she was convinced that something deeply wrong was happening in that mansion. That night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to take a bold step. She waited until the mansion was quiet, and with her heart pounding, she sneaked out of her. The corridors were dark and silent, illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the tall windows. Emily moved like a shadow, her steps muffled by the luxurious carpet. Her destination was Bethany's office. If there were answers to be found, they would surely be there. Using a copy of the key she had discreetly made days before, Emily entered the room, gently closing the door behind her. The office was a blend of elegance and power. Bookshelves covered the walls, interrupted only by expensive paintings, and a huge window overlooking the gardens. The mahogany desk in the center of the room seemed to be the epicenter of Bethany's power. With trembling hands, Emily began to search through the drawers. Documents, folders, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance. But then, hidden under a pile of papers, she found a folder simply marked Phoenix Project. Intrigued, Emily opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she read the contents. These were detailed reports on medical experiments, experimental drug protocols, and plans for inducing prolonged artificial coma. "My God," Emily whispered, feeling nauseated. "What have they done to you, Richard?" Suddenly, a noise in the corridor made her freeze. Footsteps were approaching. In panic, Emily quickly took photos of the documents with her cell phone, put everything back in place, and hid behind a heavy curtain. The door opened and Emily held her breath. Through a small gap in the curtain, she saw Bethany enter, followed by a man she recognized as Dr. Henry, the physician responsible for Richard. "We have a problem," Bethany said, her voice tense. "The new nurse is asking too many questions. She could compromise everything." Dr. Henry sighed heavily. "I warned that keeping Richard in this state for so long would be risky. People would eventually start to suspect." "We have no choice," Bethany retorted. "If Richard wakes up, we lose everything. Our father's will is clear. He gets majority control of the company. Everything I've built over the past 15 years will go down the drain." "And what about the nurse?" Dr. Henry asked, his voice laden with concern. Bethany was silent for a moment, her face a mask of cold determination. "Take care of it," she finally said. "Use the same method we used with the previous one. Make it look like an accident." Emily felt her blood freeze. Had she just heard Bethany order her elimination? What had happened to the previous nurse? When Bethany and Dr. Henry finally left the office, Emily waited several minutes before daring to move. With her heart pounding in her chest, she emerged from her hiding place and silently returned to her room. Lying in her bed, trembling, Emily knew she had just crossed a point of no return. She was in the middle of a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple medical case. It was about greed, power, and the willingness to destroy lives to maintain them. But now she also knew that Richard's life, and possibly her own, depended on her. There was no going back. Emily would have to be smarter, more cautious, and braver than ever if she wanted to uncover the whole truth and, perhaps, save Richard. With her mind spinning and her heart heavy, Emily finally fell into a restless sleep, knowing that when the sun rose, she would be in a race against time, a race where the stakes were life or death, and where every misstep could be her last. The sun had barely risen when Emily awoke, her body tense and her mind alert. The revelations of the previous night weighed on her like a dark cloud. She knew that every move she made from now on would be crucial. One misstep could cost her life. As she prepared for another day at the Morgan mansion, Emily mentally elaborated her next step. She needed allies, more information, and above all a plan to protect Richard and herself. Upon arriving at Richard's room, Emily was surprised by an unexpected visit. Dr. Henry was there, examining the monitors with a worried expression. "Good. Morning, Dr. Henry," Emily greeted, keeping her voice calm despite the turmoil inside her. The doctor turned, startled. "Miss Adams, good morning. I was just checking Mr. Morgan's vital signs." Emily noticed the nervousness in his voice, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. She decided to take a risk. "Doctor, may I ask a question? I've noticed some inconsistencies in Mr. Richard's medical records. The medications, for example, seem—" "We shouldn't discuss this here," Dr. Henry interrupted her abruptly, casting a furtive glance at the security cameras in the corner of the room. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Meet me in the garden during your break. There are things you need to know." With that, he left hurriedly, leaving Emily intrigued and apprehensive. Was it a trap, or was Dr. Henry really willing to help? The key. Hours dragged on until Emily's break. With her heart racing, she headed to the garden, choosing a bench partially hidden by a large hibiscus bush. Dr. Henry arrived minutes later, nervously looking around before sitting beside her. "Miss Adams," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to tell you puts my life at risk, but I can no longer carry this burden alone." Emily nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Richard is not in a natural coma," the doctor revealed. "He has been kept artificially sedated for years. Initially, it was necessary due to injuries from the accident, but then Bethany saw an opportunity." "Opportunity?" Emily asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Control," Dr. Henry sighed heavily. "Control of the company, the family fortune. As long as Richard is incapacitated, Bethany has total power." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "But why did you agree to this?" The doctor's face contorted into an expression of guilt and shame. "At first it was threats, then bribes. I let myself be corrupted, but now I can't continue with this anymore." "And the previous nurse?" Emily dared to ask. Dr. Henry paled. "She discovered too much. There was an accident. Bethany is ruthless when it comes to protecting her interests." Emily absorbed the information, her stomach churning. "What can we do? How can we help Richard?" "It's risky, but—" Dr. Henry hesitated, then continued. "If we gradually reduce the sedation, there's a chance Richard will wake up. But we need to be extremely careful. Bethany cannot suspect anything." At that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both fall silent. Mrs. Eleanor appeared around the corner of the garden, her suspicious gaze fixed on them. "Your break is over, Miss Adams," the housekeeper announced dryly. Emily stood up, exchanging one last meaningful look with Dr. Henry before following Mrs. Eleanor back to the mansion. Back in Richard's room, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She looked at her patient's motionless face, determined to free him from his chemical imprisonment. "I'm going to get you out of this, Richard," she whispered, gently holding his hand. "I promise." In the days that followed, Emily and Dr. Henry worked in secret, minutely reducing Richard's sedative doses. It was a slow and dangerous process. Any abrupt change could be noticed or cause irreversible damage. Meanwhile, Emily continued her normal routine, feigning ignorance in front of Bethany and Mrs. Eleanor. Each suspicious look, each seemingly innocent question from the two women made her heart race. She knew she was walking a fine line between discovery and disaster. A week after they began the sedation reduction process, Emily noticed the first signs of change in Richard. Small finger movements, subtle alterations in breathing patterns. These were changes almost imperceptible to anyone not looking for them, but to Emily they were signs of hope. One night, while performing the final procedures before ending her shift, Emily had a surprise that almost made her scream. As she leaned over Richard to adjust his pillow, she saw his eyes open slightly. "Richard?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. His eyes blinked slowly, focusing on her face for a brief moment before closing again. It was just an instant, but it was enough. Richard was coming back. With her heart racing, Emily ran to find Dr. Henry. They needed to accelerate the process now, before Bethany noticed what was happening. But as she turned a corner, Emily collided with someone. Looking up, her blood froze. It was Bethany, her cold, calculating gaze fixed on her. "Miss Adams," Bethany said, her voice laden with suspicion. "Where are you going in such a hurry? I hope you're not doing anything imprudent." Emily swallowed hard, knowing she was walking on thin ice. The truth was about to come out, and she feared that the final confrontation was closer than she imagined. "Just finishing my rounds, Dr. Morgan," Emily responded, struggling to keep her voice steady. Bethany studied her for a long moment, like a predator evaluating its prey. "Very well," she finally said. "Don't forget our keen agreement. Loyalty is very important in this house." With one last penetrating look, Bethany walked away, leaving Emily trembling in the corridor. The nurse knew that time was running out. The race to save Richard and herself had entered its most dangerous phase. As she watched Bethany disappear at the end of the corridor, Emily took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. The cat and mouse game had begun, and she was determined to win no matter the cost. The days that followed were a dangerous dance of secrets and lies. Emily and Dr. Henry continued their clandestine work, gradually reducing Richard's sedation, while maintaining a facade of normalcy for Bethany and the rest of the mansion staff. Each small progress Richard made was a silent victory for Emily. The finger movements became more frequent, his eyelids trembled more regularly, and occasionally she could swear she saw his eyes moving behind his closed eyelids as if he were dreaming. On a particularly tense morning, Emily was performing Richard's morning care when she noticed something different. His breathing was stronger, more regular. Leaning over him, she whispered softly, "Richard, can you hear me?" To her surprise and emotion, Richard's eyes opened slowly. This time it wasn't a quick flash like before, but a conscious, focused gaze. Where am I?" Richard's voice was hoarse, almost inaudible after years of silence. Emily felt tears of joy and relief spring to her eyes. "You're home, Richard. You're safe." At that moment, the door to the room opened abruptly. Dr. Henry entered, his face a mixture of excitement and fear. "He's awake?" the doctor asked, quickly approaching the bed. Emily nodded, unable to contain her smile. "Yes, he's conscious." Dr. Henry immediately began examining Richard, checking his vital signs and neurological responses. "This is amazing," he murmured. "His recovery is remarkable, considering how long he's been sedated." Richard looked from one to the other, confusion evident on his face. What happened to me?" Emily and Dr. Henry exchanged apprehensive looks. How to explain 15 years of conspiracy and family betrayal? "Richard," Emily began gently, "you suffered an accident a long time ago. You've been sleeping for a long period." "How long?" Richard asked, his voice gaining strength. Dr. Henry hesitated before answering. 15 years, Richard." The shock on Richard's face was palpable. 15 years? But how? Why? Before they could elaborate, the sound of heels echoed in the corridor. Bethany was coming. "Quick," Emily whispered urgently. "Pretend you're still asleep, Richard. Your life may depend on it." Without fully understanding, but sensing the gravity of the situation, Richard closed his eyes, returning to his previous position. Seconds later, Bethany entered the room, her sharp gaze sweeping the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. "Morning routine, Dr. Morgan," Emily responded, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. Dr. Henry was just doing a routine evaluation. Bethany approached the bed, studying Richard's apparently sleeping face. For a tense moment, Emily feared she might notice something different. Any changes? Bethany asked Dr. Henry, her voice cold. The doctor shook his head. Nothing significant, Dr. Morgan. The patient's condition remains stable. Bethany nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Richard's face. Very well. Continue monitoring. I want to be informed immediately of any change, no matter how small. With one last penetrating look at Emily, Bethany left the room. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension and fear. When Bethany's footsteps finally disappeared down the corridor, Richard opened his eyes again, his gaze now full of confusion and a growing understanding. That was Bethany? My sister? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Why did I have to pretend to be asleep? What's really going on? Emily and Dr. Henry exchanged worried looks. It was time for the truth. Richard, Emily began, gently holding his hand, there's a lot we need to tell you. It's a long and difficult story, but you need to know the truth. In the minutes that followed, Emily and Dr. Henry revealed to Richard the extent of Bethany's conspiracy. They told him about the accident, the prolonged sedation, the control of the company and family fortune. Richard listened in silence, his face a mask of shock and pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with emotion. My own sister. How could she? Greed and power can corrupt even the strongest bonds, Dr. Henry said softly. What do we do now? Richard asked, looking at Emily and the doctor. Emily took a deep breath. We need to get you out of here, Richard. But we have to be extremely careful. Bethany has eyes and ears everywhere. I know this house better than anyone, Richard said, a spark of determination shining in his eyes. There's a secret passage in my closet. It leads directly outside the property. Dr. Henry nodded. That could be our best chance. But Richard is still weak. He'll need help to move. I'll take him, Emily offered without hesitation. But we need a distraction for Bethany and the security guards. The three spent the next few hours carefully planning every detail of the escape. Dr. Henry would be in charge of creating a fake medical emergency in another wing of the mansion, diverting everyone's attention. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the corridors of the mansion, Emily knew they were about to embark on the most dangerous part of their journey. The plan was set, but the slightest mistake could cost everything. With her heart racing, she looked at Richard, who was now sitting on the bed, gathering strength for the imminent escape. Ready? She asked softly. Richard nodded, his eyes full of determination. More than ready. It's time to reclaim my life. Emily took a deep breath, knowing that the next moments would define not only Richard's fate, but her own. The final battle against Bethany was about to begin, and she was determined to win no matter the cost. Night fell over the Morgan mansion like a velvet cloak, bringing with it a deceptive quietness. In the dark and silent corridors, the tension was palpable, like electricity in the air before a storm. Emily, her heart pounding furiously against her chest, was helping Richard get dressed. 15 years of inactivity had left his muscles weak and atrophied, but the determination in his eyes was unwavering. Can you do this? Emily whispered, concern evident in her voice. Richard nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. I have to. I can't stay here another minute. Outside the room, they heard the muffled sound of footsteps. Dr. Henry entered quickly, closing the door behind him. Everything's ready, he informed them in a low voice. I created a distraction in the West Wing. The security team is all focused. There now. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. All right, it's now or never. Carefully, she helped Richard stand up from the bed. He stumbled slightly, leaning heavily on her, but managed to stay upright. The secret passage, Richard murmured, indicating the closet with a head movement. Slowly, the trio moved toward the closet. Emily felt a wave of relief when Richard, with trembling fingers, activated a hidden mechanism, revealing a concealed door in the back wall. This leads directly to the gardens, Richard explained as they entered the narrow, dark passage. "There's an exit near the east wall where security is weakest." They advanced slowly through the passage, the damp and heavy air around them. Emily could feel Richard struggling with each step, his weakened body protesting against the sudden effort. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a small wooden door. Richard pushed it carefully, revealing the night garden beyond. The fresh night air hit them like a revitalizing wave. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could escape. But fate had other plans. Die. They crept through the bushes toward the wall. A scream cut through the silence of the night. "They've escaped. The patient is gone." It was Mrs. Eleanor's voice echoing through the property like a shrill alarm. "Damn," Emily whispered. "They found out." The sound of excited voices and hurried footsteps began to fill the air. Lights came on all over, the mansion sweeping the gardens. "We have to run," Dr. Henry urged, panic in his voice. But Richard could barely walk, let alone run. Emily looked frantically around, searching for a way out. That's when they saw it. A few meters from them, partially hidden by a bush, was a small golf cart used by the gardeners. "There," Emily pointed. "We can use that." With a Herculean effort, they helped Richard climb into the cart. Emily took the wheel, while Dr. Henry squeezed into the back seat. The cart's engine roared to life, attracting the attention of the security guards. Shouts of "There they are" filled the air, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching rapidly. Emily stepped hard on the accelerator. The small vehicle advanced through the gardens, jumping over flower beds and circling ornamental statues. Behind them, the headlights of security cars turned on, illuminating the night like predatory eyes. "The gate!" Richard shouted, pointing ahead. The imposing iron gate, normally the majestic entrance to the property, now stood as a final barrier between them and freedom. Emily felt panic growing. The gate was closed, and the security cars were approaching. Rapidly. That's when Dr. Henry did something unexpected. He jumped from the moving cart. "Keep going," he shouted. "I'll delay them." Before Emily could protest, the doctor ran toward the approaching cars, waving frantically and shouting to attract their attention. With a broken heart but determined, Emily kept the cart heading toward the gate. The distance was shrinking rapidly, and there was no sign that the gate would open. "Hold on," she shouted to Richard. At the last second, Emily sharply turned the cart. Instead of hitting the gate directly, they slid parallel to it, scraping the side of the vehicle against the iron bars. The sound of metal against metal was deafening, sparks flying around them. But miraculously, the small space between the bars was enough for the cart to pass through, although damaged. They emerged on the other side of the gate, the cart now limping, but still moving. Emily didn't dare to look back, focusing only on the road ahead. "We did it," Richard murmured, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and incredulity. Emily nodded, tears of relief and adrenaline running down her face. They had escaped from the mansion, but she knew that the battle was far from over. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emily guided the damaged golf cart away from the Morgan property. Where would they go now? How would they prove the truth about what Bethany had done, and what would happen to Dr. Henry? These questions spun in her mind, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of triumph. They had taken the first step toward freedom and justice. Richard, sitting beside her, gazed in wonder at the sunrise as if seeing it for the first time. And, in a way, it was true. After 15 years of forced darkness, he was finally free, to see the light of day again. Emily knew that the challenges ahead would be enormous. Bethany would not give up easily, and they would have to fight to expose the truth and recover what was stolen from Richard. But at that moment, as the sun rose in the sky illuminating the path ahead, she felt a renewed determination. Their journey was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. The sun was already high in the sky when Emily finally stopped the battered golf cart in a wooded area, away from the main road. She and Richard had traveled a considerable distance, but they knew they couldn't lower their guard. Bethany would certainly have already mobilized all her resources to find them. "We need a plan," Emily said, helping Richard out of the vehicle. He was still weak, but with each passing hour he seemed to regain a bit more of his strength. "I know someone who can help us," Richard replied, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "My old lawyer, Charles Miller. He was always loyal to our family, but never got along with Bethany. If anyone can give us shelter and legal guidance, it's him." Emily nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "Great, but how do we get to him without attracting attention?" Richard smiled weakly. "There's a hunting cabin that belonged to my father not far from here. Very few people know its location. We can hide there while we contact Charles." Carefully, they abandoned the golf cart and continued on foot through the dense forest. Progress was slow, with Richard needing to rest frequently. Emily remained constantly alert, fearing to hear the sound of pursuers at any moment. After what seemed like hours of walking, they finally spotted the cabin. It was a rustic structure, almost completely hidden by vegetation. "It seems nobody has been here for years," Emily commented as she helped Richard climb the steps of the porch. "Probably not," Richard agreed. "Bethany was never the type who appreciates nature." Inside the cabin, they found furniture covered by dusty sheets and a thick layer of dust on all surfaces. But the place was intact and, more importantly, offered a safe refuge. Emily helped. Richard settled into an armchair before beginning to explore the cabin in search of supplies. To her surprise and relief, she found some canned food still within the expiration date in the small kitchen cabinet. As she prepared a simple meal for them, Emily couldn't help but reflect on the madness of the past few days. Just a week ago, she was just a nurse trying to earn money to help her mother. Now she was in the middle of a conspiracy, worthy of a suspense film. "What are you thinking about?" Richard's voice pulled her from her musings. Emily sighed, sitting down beside him with 2 plates of heated beans. "About how life can change so quickly, about how—" She hesitated for a moment before continuing, "about how I got so deeply involved in all of this." Richard observed her for a long moment, his eyes full of a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I'm sorry for putting you in this situation, Emily. You risked everything for me, a stranger." "No," Emily replied firmly, "I don't regret it. What Bethany did, what she's doing, is wrong. I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." A comfortable silence fell over them as they ate. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice laden with emotion. "You mentioned your mother before, that you needed the money to help her. Want to tell me about that?" Emily felt a knot form in her throat. "She has a rare degenerative disease. The treatments are expensive and, well, that's why I took the job at the mansion. The salary was 3 times higher than my last job." Richard reached out, holding her hand gently. "When all this is over, I promise your mother will have the best possible treatment. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." Tears sprang to Emily's eyes and she smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Richard. But first, we need to resolve this situation." They spent the next few hours discussing their next steps. Richard knew Charles's phone number by heart, but they had no way to contact him from the isolated cabin. "We'll have to risk going to town," Emily concluded. "Find a payphone or something." Richard nodded, though concern was evident on his face. "It's risky, but we have no choice. The longer we delay, the more time Bethany will have to cover her tracks." They decided to wait until nightfall to make the journey to the nearest town. As daylight faded, Emily helped Richard stand up. He was firmer on his feet now, but still needed support. Just as they were about to leave the cabin, a sound made them freeze. Footsteps approaching. Emily felt her heart race. Had they been found? Was it Bethany or her henchman? The cabin door opened slowly, and a familiar figure entered, battered and exhausted, but alive. "Dr. Henry!" Emily exclaimed, a mixture of relief and shock in her voice. The doctor smiled tiredly. "I thought I might find you here. We have a lot to talk about." Richard and Emily exchanged surprised looks. The unexpected arrival of Dr. Henry brought not only relief but also new questions. What had he faced after they escaped? And what new information could he bring? As the trio gathered in the small living room of the cabin, Emily felt they were about to uncover another layer of this intricate mystery. The complete truth about Bethany's conspiracy was getting closer and closer to being revealed. Dr. Henry's arrival brought a wave of relief and apprehension to the small cabin. Emily quickly helped the exhausted doctor to sit down, while Richard, still weak but with eyes shining with curiosity, leaned forward in his armchair. "How did you find us?" Emily asked, offering a glass of water to the newcomer. Dr. Henry drank eagerly before responding. "It wasn't easy. After creating the distraction for your escape, I was detained by security, but I managed to convince them that I was just responding to a medical emergency. Bethany was furious, of course." "What happened next?" Richard asked, his voice tense. The doctor sighed heavily. "Bethany is moving heaven and earth to find you. She invented a story about Richard being kidnapped by an unbalanced nurse." He cast an apologetic look at Emily. "There are police reports, alerts on the roads, and the situation is ugly." Emily felt a chill down her spine. The enormity of what they were facing seemed even more frightening now. "But how did you escape?" she asked. I pretended to collaborate with Bethany," Dr. Henry admitted, lowering his eyes. "Said I would help find you. She gave me access to information, thinking I was on her side. That's how I discovered this cabin." Richard frowned. "Does that mean Bethany knows too?" "No," the doctor quickly assured. Well, let's say I accidentally deleted that information from the files before fleeing." A heavy silence fell over the group as they absorbed the information. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. "Dr. Henry, there's something I don't understand," she began hesitantly. "You were part of this conspiracy for years. Why did you decide to help us now?" The doctor seemed to age 10 years before their eyes. "Because I can no longer live with the guilt," he said softly. "What we did, what I allowed to happen, is unforgivable." He then began to reveal the complete truth, a story that left Richard and Emily speechless with horror and disbelief. "It all started 15 years ago with Richard's accident," Dr. Henry explained. "It wasn't really an accident. Bethany, she gradually poisoned Richard, using a substance that mimicked the symptoms of a rare neurological disease." Richard paled, his hand gripping the arm of the chair. "My own sister. She wanted control of the company and the family fortune," the doctor continued. "The plan was to keep Richard in an induced coma for a few months, long enough for her to take legal control of everything. But then..." "Then what?" Emily pressed, feeling they were about to discover something crucial. Dr. Henry took a deep breath. "Then we discovered that Richard could hear and understand everything around him, even in the coma. He was completely conscious, just unable to move or communicate." The horror of the situation hit Emily like a punch. 15 years trapped in his own body, conscious but unable to do anything. It was an unimaginable nightmare. "Why didn't you let him wake up then?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and compassion. "Bethany realized it was too risky," the doctor answered, shame evident in his voice. "If Richard woke up, he could expose everything, so she decided to keep him sedated indefinitely." Richard, who had remained silent, finally spoke, his voice laden with emotion. I remember hearing voices, understanding what was happening, but not being able to do anything. It was like being trapped in an endless nightmare." Emily felt hot tears running down her cheeks. She moved closer to Richard, holding his hand in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "And you allowed this to continue for 15 years?" she asked Dr. Henry, unable to hide the accusation in her voice. The doctor lowered his head, shame evident in every line of his face. "At first it was threats, then bribes. I convinced myself that I was doing the best for Richard, that waking him after so long would be cruel. But they were just excuses. The truth is that I was a coward." A heavy silence fell over the cabin as everyone digested the shocking revelations. The magnitude of Bethany's betrayal and the depth of Richard's suffering were almost impossible to comprehend. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice surprisingly firm. "What's done is done. Now we need to focus on exposing the truth and making Bethany pay for what she did." Emily nodded, determination shining in her eyes. Richard is right. We can't change the past, but we can fight for the future. Dr. Henry, are you willing to testify about all of this? The doctor raised his gaze, a spark of redemption in his tired eyes. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to correct my mistakes. With this new resolution, the trio began to formulate a plan. They needed to contact lawyer Charles Miller, gather evidence, and prepare for the legal battle that would surely come. As they discussed strategies, Emily couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and determination. They were about to face a powerful and ruthless adversary. But now, armed with the truth and united in their purpose, they had a real chance of winning. The night advanced outside, but inside the small cabin, a light of hope began to shine. The journey for justice was just beginning, and it would be long and difficult. But Emily knew, looking at Richard and Dr. Henry, that she was no longer alone in this fight. Dawn would bring new challenges, but also the promise of a new beginning. And they were ready to face whatever came together. Dawn brought a new determination to the trio, taking refuge in the cabin. Emily, Richard, and Dr. Henry had spent much of the night discussing strategies and sharing information. Now, with the first rays of sun filtering through the dusty windows, it was time to put their plans into action. We need to contact Charles Miller as soon as possible, Richard said, his voice stronger than in previous days. With each passing hour, he seemed to regain a bit more of his vitality. Emily nodded, checking the cell phone that Dr. Henry had brought with him. We still have enough battery for one call, but we need to be quick and discreet. Dr. Henry stood up, stretching his aching back after a night on the old sofa. I can go to the nearest town to get supplies and try to find a payphone. It will be safer than using a cell phone that can be traced. Richard hesitated, concern evident on his face. Are you sure, Doctor? Bethany must be looking for you too. The doctor smiled sadly. It's the least I can do to begin to redeem myself. Besides, among the three of us, I'm the one least likely to be immediately recognized. After some discussion, they agreed to the plan. Dr. Henry would go to town while Emily and Richard would remain in the cabin, preparing for the next steps. When the doctor left, Emily turned to Richard, noticing the tension in his shoulders. How are you feeling? She asked gently. Richard sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Physically, I'm improving each day. But emotionally, it's as if 15 years of repressed emotions were trying to come out all at once. Emily sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. It's understandable. What you went through, nobody should have to endure something like that. You know what's hardest? Richard continued, his voice low and intense. Remembering all those years, hearing conversations, understanding what was happening but being unable to do anything, the feeling of powerlessness. Tears began to form in Richard's eyes, and Emily felt her heart tighten. Without thinking, she enveloped him in a tight hug. Richard initially stiffened, unaccustomed to human contact after so many years, but soon relaxed, letting the tears flow freely. They stayed like this for a long moment, the silence of the cabin broken only by Richard's muffled sobs. When they finally separated, there was a new intimacy between them, forged by shared adversity and mutual understanding. Thank you, Richard said softly, wiping his eyes. I think I needed that. Emily smiled gently. We're in this together. Richard, you're not alone anymore. Throughout the day, they worked together to organize the information they had and plan their next steps. Richard, despite still being physically weak, showed a sharp and strategic mind, traits that had undoubtedly made him a successful business leader in the past. Emily, in turn, contributed her unique perspective as someone who had witnessed the operation from inside the Morgan mansion. Together, they began to assemble a detailed picture of Bethany's conspiracy. As the sun began to set, concern for Dr. Henry grew. He should have returned hours ago. What if something happened to him? Emily asked, anxiously looking out the window. Richard tried to appear confident, though concern was also evident in his eyes. He knows the risks. Maybe he decided to wait until nightfall to return, for safety. Just when the tension was becoming unbearable, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Emily immediately positioned herself protectively in front of Richard, grabbing a heavy frying pan as an improvised weapon. The door opened slowly, revealing an exhausted but triumphant Dr. Henry. "I did it!" he exclaimed, entering the cabin, and quickly closing the door behind him. "I spoke with Charles Miller. He's on his way." The wave of relief that swept through the cabin was almost palpable. Emily dropped the frying pan, laughing nervously at the situation. "What did he say?" Richard asked anxiously. Dr. Henry sat down, gratefully accepting the glass of water Emily offered him. He was shocked, as expected, but he's also determined to help. He said he's kept his own suspicions about Bethany for years, but never had concrete evidence. "When will he arrive?" Emily asked. "Tomorrow at dawn," the doctor replied. "He'll bring legal resources, money, and clean clothes for all of us. He's also organizing a safe place for us to hide while we prepare the case." The news brought a wave of renewed hope. Finally, they would have a powerful ally in their fight against Bethany. As night fell, the trio gathered around the small kitchen table, sharing a simple meal made with the supplies Dr. Henry had brought. The mood was one of caution, but also of cautious optimism. "Tomorrow," Richard said, raising his glass of water in an improvised toast, "we begin to rebuild our lives and seek justice." Emily and Dr. Henry raised their glasses in response. "To justice," they echoed. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Emily couldn't help but feel a mixture of anxiety and expectation for what was to come. They were about to enter a difficult battle against a formidable adversary, but for the first time since this madness began, she felt they had a real chance of winning. Looking at Richard, who was finally sleeping peacefully on the old sofa, Emily made a silent promise. She would see this fight through to the end, no matter the cost, for Richard, for justice, and somehow for herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities, and they would be ready to face them together. The dawn brought with it a fine mist that hovered over the forest surrounding the cabin. Emily, who had barely managed to sleep due to anxiety and expectation, was the first to wake up. She moved silently through the small kitchen, preparing a strong coffee for everyone. The rich and comforting aroma soon woke Richard and Dr. Henry. The three gathered around the kitchen table, their expressions a mixture of determination and apprehension. "Charles should arrive any moment," Richard commented, checking the old clock on the wall. As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car approaching reached their ears. Emily rushed to the window, carefully parting the dusty curtain. "It's him," she announced, observing an elegant black sedan park near the cabin. A tall and distinguished man, with grey hair and thin-framed glasses, got out of the car. He looked cautiously around before heading to the cabin door. Richard stood up, leaning on Emily, and it was he who opened the door. "Charles," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's been so long, old friend." The lawyer was paralyzed for a moment, his eyes wide with shock at seeing Richard standing before him. "My God, Richard," he finally managed to say, "it really is you." The two men embraced, years of friendship and trust evident in the gesture. When they separated, Charles looked at Emily and Dr. Henry, who were watching the scene. "You must be Emily," he said, extending his hand to her. "And Dr. Henry, I cannot express how much I admire the courage of you both." After the initial introductions, everyone sat down in the small living room. Charles opened his briefcase, spreading documents over the coffee table. "First," he began, his voice assuming a professional tone, "you need to know that the situation is serious. Bethany has mobilized significant resources to find you. There's a narrative being spread in the media about a kidnapping and an unbalanced nurse." Emily felt her stomach sink. "So everyone thinks that I—" "Don't worry," Charles gently interrupted her. "We have the truth on our side. And with Richard's testimony and the evidence that Dr. Henry collected, we can dismantle this farce." He then detailed the plan he had devised. First, they would move to a secure location, a country house belonging to a trusted client of Charles, away from the prying eyes of the media and Bethany's henchmen. "From there," Charles continued, "we'll begin to build our case. We'll need complete medical examinations of Richard to prove that he was conscious the entire time. Dr. Henry, your cooperation and testimony will be crucial. The doctor nodded gravely. I'm ready to do whatever is necessary to correct my mistakes. Charles then turned to Emily. Your role will be equally important. You were an eyewitness to Richard's conditions in the mansion and Bethany's suspicious actions. Your perspective as an outsider who discovered the conspiracy will be invaluable. Emily felt the weight of responsibility, but also a fierce determination. I'll do whatever it takes, she affirmed. Richard, who had remained silent, finally spoke. And what about the company, the family fortune? Bethany has had 15 years to consolidate her control. Charles smiled, a shrewd gleam in his eyes. But you see, Richard, your father was a cautious man. The original will, which Bethany thinks she destroyed, actually has a copy kept in a secret vault. In it, there are specific clauses about what to do in case of your prolonged incapacitation. Bethany may have manipulated things legally for a while, but with you back and with the evidence we have, we can reverse everything. The news brought a flash of hope to Richard's eyes. My father was always a cautious man, he murmured, a sad smile playing on his lips. The next moments were dedicated to organizing their departure from the cabin. Charles had brought new clothes, fake documents, and cash for all of them. As they prepared to leave, Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of apprehension. They were about to leave their hiding place and face the world outside, a world where Bethany had influence and resources to hunt them down. As if reading her thoughts, Richard approached her. Is everything okay? He asked softly. Emily hesitated before answering. Just a little scared, I guess. All of this seems so much bigger than us. Richard took her hand, squeezing it gently. It is bigger than us, but we're in this together, and together we're stronger than Bethany can imagine. Richard's gesture and words brought a smile to Emily's face. She nodded, feeling her determination renewed. As they loaded Charles's car with their few belongings, Emily looked at the cabin that had been their refuge for the past few days. There, amid chaos and uncertainty, bonds had been forged, truths revealed, and a battle begun. Now they were about to take the next step in their journey for justice. The path ahead would be difficult, full of dangers and challenges, but with loyal allies by their side and the strength of truth guiding their steps, Emily knew they had a real chance of winning. When the car finally departed, leaving the cabin, behind, Emily felt a mixture of apprehension and expectation. The game was about to change and Bethany wouldn't know what hit her. The real battle was just beginning. Charles's black sedan wound through back roads, avoiding the main highways, where security cameras could capture their passage. In the back seat, Emily watched the landscape gradually change from dense forest to open fields and eventually to the suburbs of a city she didn't recognize. Where exactly are we going? She asked, breaking the tense silence that had settled in the car. Charles, who was driving with the concentration of a Formula One pilot, replied without taking his eyes off the road. It's better that you don't know the exact location for now. The less information you have, the less you can reveal if something goes wrong. The somber tone in his voice made Emily swallow hard. Beside her, Richard squeezed her hand, reassuringly. After a few more hours of travel, they finally arrived at an isolated property. An elegant but discreet country house stood in the middle of a large plot, surrounded by tall trees. Welcome to our headquarters, Charles announced, parking the car in the garage attached to the house. Inside, they were greeted by a middle-aged woman with a severe but gentle air. This is Mrs. Clara, Charles introduced. She will take care of you while we're here. You can trust her completely. After settling into their rooms and enjoying a substantial meal prepared by Mrs. Clara, everyone gathered in the spacious office on the ground floor. It was time to put the plan into action. First, Charles began, spreading documents over the large oak table. We need to legally establish that Richard is alive and conscious. Dr. Henry, I need you to organize a complete battery of medical exams. We have a trusted doctor who will come here to perform them. The doctor nodded, making notes on a pad. Emily, Charles continued, your part is crucial. We need your detailed testimony about everything you saw and heard at the Morgan mansion. Every suspicious conversation, every document you glimpsed, every strange behavior from Bethany or the staff, everything is important. Emily felt the weight of responsibility but nodded determinedly. I'm ready. As for me, Richard spoke, his voice stronger than in previous days. What can I do? Charles smiled, a shrewd gleam in his eyes. You, my friend, have the most important role of all. We need to reintroduce you to the world in a way that Bethany cannot deny or discredit. And I have an idea of how to do that. In the days that followed, the country house transformed into a frantic operations center. Doctors came and went, performing exams on Richard and meticulously documenting his condition. Emily spent hours with Charles, detailing every moment of her stay at the Morgan mansion. Dr. Henry worked tirelessly, organizing medical records and preparing his own testimony. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Bethany's narrative was beginning to show cracks. Investigative journalists, smelling a bigger story than a simple kidnapping, were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Former employees of Morgan Enterprises, encouraged by the atmosphere of suspicion, were beginning to talk about questionable practices they had witnessed over the years. A week after their arrival at the country house, Charles gathered everyone for an update. Things are moving faster than we expected, he announced, a mixture of excitement and concern in his voice. Bethany is beginning to feel the pressure. She gave a press conference yesterday, reiterating the kidnapping story, but made some slips. The media is smelling blood. What does that mean for us? Emily asked. It means it's time to accelerate our plan, Charles replied. Richard, are you ready for the next step? Richard straightened in his chair, a fierce determination shining in his eyes. More than ready. It's time for Bethany to face the truth. Charles nodded, satisfied. Good, because tomorrow we're going to shock the world. He then revealed the plan, an exclusive interview with one of the most respected journalists in the country. Richard would appear live, telling his story and exposing Bethany's conspiracy. It's risky, Charles admitted. Bethany will certainly try to prevent the broadcast, but if we succeed, it will be a blow from which she cannot recover. As everyone discussed the final details of the plan, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They were about to change everything, to expose a truth that would shake the foundations of society. That night, unable to sleep, Emily went out to the house's porch. To her surprise, she found Richard already there, looking pensively at the stars. Nervous about tomorrow? She asked softly, joining him. Richard smiled slightly. Terrified, actually, but also ready. Ready to reclaim my life, my identity. Emily took his hand, squeezing it gently. You're not alone in this. We'll all be there with you. They stayed in silence for a moment, enjoying the quietness of the night and the comfort of each other's presence. Emily, Richard finally spoke, his voice low and intense, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know. I am eternally grateful for everything you've done. You gave me back my life, my freedom. Emily felt tears form in her eyes. You would have done the same for me, she replied softly. When their gazes met, there was a silent understanding between them. Something had changed, grown between them during this crazy journey. Something that neither of them was ready to name yet, but that was there, undeniable and powerful. As they went back inside, Emily knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The final battle was coming, and they were ready. The world wouldn't know what hit it. The dawn of the interview day brought with it an electric atmosphere of anticipation and nervousness. The country house, which in recent days had been a quiet refuge, now buzzed with activity. Emily woke up early, her stomach a knot of anxiety. Upon going down to the kitchen, she found Richard already sitting at the table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Couldn't sleep? She asked softly, sitting beside him. Richard shook his head, a tense smile on his lips. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bethany's face. It's strange, you know. After so many years, I'll finally have the chance to confront her, even if it's through a TV screen. Emily covered his hand with hers, a gesture of comfort that had become natural between them. "You're ready for this. We're ready." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of final preparations. Charles arrived early, bringing with him a team of makeup artists and stylists to prepare Richard for the cameras. Dr. Henry frantically reviewed his notes, ensuring he had all the necessary medical data at hand. At 11 a.m., journalist Julian Matthews arrived. Tall, with grey hair and shrewd eyes, he emanated an aura of professionalism and integrity that immediately calmed everyone's nerves. "Mr. Morgan," Julian said, extending his hand to Richard, "it's an honor to meet you. Your story, well, it's going to change many things." Richard nodded gravely. "That's why we chose you, Mr. Matthews. We know of your reputation for integrity and the pursuit of truth." While the technical team set up the equipment in the living room, transforming it into an improvised studio, Charles gathered everyone for a final briefing. "Remember," he emphasized, "Bethany probably already knows that something is happening. She'll do everything to prevent this broadcast. We have backups on various online platforms, but we need to keep the main transmission on air for as long as possible." Everyone nodded, the gravity of the situation palpable in the air. Finally, the moment arrived. Richard sat in the designated armchair, Emily and Dr. Henry strategically positioned out of the camera's reach, ready to offer support if necessary. Julian Matthews looked at the clock and then at the main camera. "We're on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Good afternoon, America," Julian began, his voice grave and confident. "Today we have a story that defies belief, a story of betrayal, greed, and an incredible fight for truth. With me is a man whom the world believed to be in a coma for 15 years, but whose reality is much more shocking. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Morgan." The camera moved to Richard, who took a deep breath before speaking. "Hello, America. My name is Richard Morgan, and for 15 years I was kept prisoner in my own body by the one who should have protected me, my sister, Bethany Morgan." In the minutes that followed, Richard narrated his story, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. He described the gradual poisoning, the years of consciousness trapped in an immobile body, Bethany's betrayal, and the greed that motivated it. All Emily watched, silent tears running down her face, as Richard exposed his soul to the world. She could see the weight being lifted from his shoulders with each word spoken. Suddenly Charles burst into the room, his face pale. "We have problems," he whispered urgently. "Bethany is trying to take down the broadcast. We've already lost some channels." Julian, ever the professional, didn't let any concern show. He continued conducting the interview, now turning to Dr. Henry, who provided medical evidence to corroborate Richard's story. Off camera, it was chaos. Charles and his team worked frantically to keep the broadcast on air, fighting against Bethany's efforts to silence them. "Emily," Richard called softly during a pause, "I need you to speak too. Tell what you saw, what you discovered." With her heart racing, Emily nodded. She joined Richard in front of the cameras, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as she narrated her experience at the Morgan mansion, the discoveries she made, and the dramatic escape. The interview extended for more than 2 hours, much longer than originally planned. As the truth was revealed, social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags related to the Morgan case dominated the trending topics. Finally, Julian Matthews turned to the camera for his final words. "America, you have just witnessed one of the most extraordinary stories of our time. A story of courage, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of truth." Richard Morgan, silenced for 15 years, finally had his voice heard, and now it's up to us as a society to ensure that justice is done. When the cameras finally turned off, there was a moment of stunned silence in the room. Then, as if a dam had broken, everyone began talking at once. Hugs were exchanged, tears shed. Charles entered the room, an exhausted but triumphant smile on his face. "We did it. The broadcast was a resounding success. Bethany, well, let's say she has a lot to explain now." Richard stood up, his legs a bit shaky. Emily immediately went to his side, offering support. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice laden with emotion. Charles shook his head. "No, my friend, this is just the beginning. But the hardest part is over. The truth is out there now, and nothing can stop it. As everyone celebrated this initial victory, Emily and Richard exchanged a meaningful look. They had come a long way together, faced unimaginable dangers, and now, with the truth revealed to the world, they were ready to face whatever the future held. The legal battle was still to come, and Bethany would certainly not give up without a fight. But at that moment, enveloped by the warmth of victory and the strength of their union, they allowed themselves to believe that the worst had passed. The day of truth had come, and with it, the promise of a new dawn. In the hours following the broadcast, the world seemed to have entered a collective frenzy. Social media exploded with comments, theories, and expressions of support for Richard. News channels broadcast non-stop, analyzing every detail of the interview and its implications. At the country house, the group observed this whirlwind with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Charles, glued to his phone, received constant updates from his contacts. Morgan Enterprises shares have plummeted, he informed them, hanging up from a call. The board is in an emergency meeting. Bethany is, well, let's say she's facing her own personal hell right now. Richard, sitting on the sofa with Emily by his side, nodded gravely. And what about the official investigations? They're already underway, Charles replied. The FBI has taken over the case. They want to interrogate all of us as soon as possible. Doctor. Henry, who had been silent until then, spoke. I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions. I will turn myself in and fully cooperate with the authorities. Emily felt a wave of compassion for the doctor. Despite his past mistakes, he had been fundamental in exposing the truth. Doctor, she said softly, your testimony will be crucial. Don't forget that. The next 48 hours were an emotional and eventful roller coaster. Teams of investigators arrived, conducting long interviews with each of them. Journalists camped in the vicinity of the property, desperate for more details of the story that had shocked the country. It was during this whirlwind that the news arrived. Bethany had disappeared. What? Do you mean disappeared? Emily exclaimed, incredulous. Charles sighed heavily. She wasn't at home when the police went to arrest her. Her private jet took off hours after the broadcast, with an unknown destination. The news fell like a bomb on the group. The idea of Bethany on the loose, potentially planning some retaliation, was disturbing. This changes everything, Richard said, his voice tense. She won't give up easily. Knowing my sister, she must have contingency plans, secret accounts abroad. We've already alerted Interpol, Charles assured. All borders are on alert. It's just a matter of time until she's captured. But Charles's words, although comforting, couldn't completely dispel the cloud of apprehension that hung over them. In the days that followed, as the case continued to dominate national headlines, Richard and Emily were gradually reintroduced to the outside world. Protected by a security team hired by Charles, they made carefully orchestrated public appearances. The reaction of people was overwhelmingly positive. Wherever they went, they were received with applause, words of support, and sometimes tears of compassion. Richard's story had touched the heart of the nation. On a particularly busy afternoon, after a series of meetings with lawyers and investigators, Emily found Richard alone on the porch of the house, looking pensively at the horizon. "A penny for your thoughts," she said softly, joining him. Richard smiled, though his eyes remained distant. "I'm thinking about Bethany," he admitted, "about how we got to this point. You know, there was a time when we were close, when we were children. What happened to that girl I used to know?" Emily placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes people change. Greed, power, they can corrupt even the strongest bonds." "I know," Richard sighed, "but it still hurts. Despite everything, she did. A part of me still cares about her." The moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. It was Charles, his face a mask of concern. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "I just received information that Bethany has been seen in the country, and she's not alone." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, feeling a chill down her spine. "She apparently hired professional help," Charles carefully explained. "Dangerous people with questionable reputations." The implication was clear. Bethany was planning something, and she didn't care about playing fair. "What do we do now?" Richard asked, his voice firm despite the clear concern in his eyes. Charles took a deep breath. "We need to increase security. And maybe it's time to consider taking you out of the country." Temporarily, the suggestion fell like a bomb. Leaving the country meant leaving behind everything they had fought so hard for. "No," Emily said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We can't run now. If we do that, Bethany wins." Richard nodded, taking Emily's hand. "Emily is right. We've faced worse things. We're not backing down now." Charles seemed to want to argue, but something in the determination in Richard and Emily's eyes made him hesitate. "Very well," he finally agreed, "but we'll take all possible precautions. From now on, you don't take a step without protection." As Charles walked away to make the necessary arrangements, Richard and Emily remained on the porch, their hands still intertwined. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. "Are we really ready for this?" Emily asked softly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Richard squeezed her hand gently. "Together, we're ready for anything." At that moment, enveloped by the warmth of the setting sun and the strength of their union, they allowed themselves to believe that no matter what Bethany planned, they would emerge victorious. The final battle was approaching, and they would face it with heads held high. The days that followed were a tense mixture of constant vigilance and frantic preparation. The country house, once a quiet refuge, now more resembled a besieged fortress. Security guards patrolled the perimeter 24 hours a day, while inside the house, Charles coordinated a complex network of informants and private investigators. Emily observed all this with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had come so far, risked so much, that the idea of retreating now was unthinkable. Still, the threat of Bethany loomed over them like a dark cloud, an invisible but palpable presence. On a particularly tense morning, as they had coffee in the kitchen, Richard broke the heavy silence. "We can't continue like this," he said, his voice firm. "We're hiding, letting Bethany dictate our actions. We need to take the initiative." Emily nodded, feeling a wave of relief that someone had finally expressed what she had been thinking. "I agree. But how?" Before Richard could answer, Charles burst into the kitchen, his face a mask of concern and excitement. "We have a lead," he announced without preamble. "One of my contacts identified a suspicious movement in a bank account linked to Bethany. The large sum was transferred to a shell company known for questionable services." Emily's stomach contracted. "She's planning something." "Worse," Charles continued. "The transfer was traced to a nearby city. Bethany is here, right under our noses." The silence that followed was almost deafening. The realization that their enemy was so close, possibly planning her next move, was terrifying. It was Richard who finally broke the silence. "This is good," he said to everyone's surprise. "Good?" Emily exclaimed. "How can this be good?" Richard stood up, a new energy in his movements. "It's good because now we know where she is, and we can use that to our advantage." In the minutes that followed, Richard outlined a bold plan. Instead of waiting for Bethany's next move, they would confront her directly. With the help of Charles's contacts and the discreet support of the authorities, they would set a trap. "It's risky," Charles warned, though his eyes shone with a mixture of admiration and excitement. "This whole case has been risky from the beginning," Emily argued, feeling strangely energized by the idea. "At least this way we'll be in control." The preparations for the plan consumed the next 2 days. Every detail was meticulously planned, every possible scenario considered. Emily was surprised by Richard's calmness and strategy. Years of forced immobility seemed to have sharpened his mind in an extraordinary way. On the eve of the operation, Emily found Richard alone in the house's library. He was standing by the window, looking at the starry night outside. "Nervous?" she asked softly, approaching. Richard turned, a small smile on his lips. "Strangely, no. I feel as if my whole life has prepared me for this moment." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the feeling. "Richard, there's something I need to tell you. In case something goes wrong tomorrow." "Nothing will go wrong," Richard gently interrupted her, taking her hands in his. "But if it does," Emily insisted, feeling her heart race, "I need you to know these past few months, despite all the danger and uncertainty, have been the most meaningful of my life. And that's because of you." Richard's eyes softened, a deep emotion shining in them. "Emily, you gave me back my life. Not just by freeing me from that mansion, but by reminding me what it really means to live." He hesitated for a moment, then, as if making a decision, leaned in and kissed her softly. It was a tender kiss, full of promise and gratitude. When they separated, both were smiling, a new understanding passing between them. "Tomorrow," Richard said softly, "we're going to close this chapter of our lives, and then, if you want, we can start a new one together." Emily nodded, feeling a wave of emotion flood her. "Together," she agreed. The next morning, the operation was set in motion. The team divided, each with their specific role. Charles coordinated everything from an improvised command center in constant communication with the authorities. Emily and Richard, protected by an elite security team, headed to the location where Bethany had been located, a luxury hotel in the center of the city. Emily's heart was beating furiously as they approached the hotel. Years of conspiracy, months of struggle and sacrifice, all leading to this moment. When they entered the hotel lobby, time seemed to slow down, and then, as in a movie, they saw her. Bethany Morgan, the woman who had orchestrated this entire macabre plot, was standing near the elevators, surrounded by threatening-looking men. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Richard and Bethany's gazes crossed for the first time in 15 years. Shock, anger, fear. A myriad of emotions passed over Bethany's face in a matter of seconds. And then, chaos erupted. Screams filled the air. People ran in all directions. Bethany's security guards advanced, but were quickly subdued by Richard's team and the authorities who emerged from all sides. In the midst of the confusion, Bethany tried to flee, but Emily, driven by a fierce determination, intercepted her. "It's over, Bethany," Emily said firmly, blocking her path. "It's time to face the truth." Bethany, cornered and desperate, drew a gun, but before she could make any movement, Richard appeared by Emily's side. "Enough, sister," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "You've caused enough harm." For a tense moment, Bethany hesitated, the gun trembling in her hand. Then, slowly, as if the weight of all her crimes finally hit her, she lowered the gun. The authorities quickly surrounded her, handcuffing her and taking her away. As Bethany was escorted out, she cast one last look at Richard, a look full of belated regret and an understanding of what she had lost. With Bethany finally captured, a wave of relief swept over Emily and Richard. They embraced tightly, the emotions of the past few months finally overflowing. "It's over," Emily whispered, tears of joy and relief running down her face. Richard nodded, holding her close. "No, my love. This is where it truly begins." As they were surrounded by law enforcement officers and eager reporters, Emily and Richard remained united, ready to face whatever the future held. The long night of lies and betrayal had finally come to an end, and a new dawn was announcing itself on the horizon. The months following Bethany's capture were a whirlwind of activity. The Morgan case, as it became known, dominated the headlines for weeks, triggering a series of investigations that shook the foundations of the corporate and political world of the country. Emily observed all of this with a mixture of relief and disbelief. At times, it was hard to believe that all that madness had really happened, that she had played such a crucial role in unraveling a conspiracy that lasted 15 years. Bethany's trial was an unprecedented media event. Richard, demonstrating a compassion that surprised many, asked for clemency for his sister, arguing that she too had been a victim of her own greed and ambition. In the end, Bethany was sentenced to a long prison term, with the possibility of parole after serving a third of the sentence. Dr. Henry, in recognition of his cooperation and sincere remorse, received a lighter sentence, with most of it served in community service, working in public hospitals. For Richard, the post-trial months were of intense readaptation and recovery. With the help of a team of doctors and therapists, he worked tirelessly to recover the physical strength and dexterity that years of immobility had stolen. Emily remained by his side throughout the process, her love and support unwavering. Together, they faced night terrors, moments of doubt, and the inevitable difficulties of reintegrating Richard into a world that had changed drastically in his absence. 1 year after Bethany's capture, Emily and Richard were standing on the porch of the Morgan mansion. The property, once a symbol of imprisonment and betrayal, had been completely renovated. The somber walls gave way to vibrant colors, and the gardens, once meticulously controlled, now displayed an almost wild exuberance. "It's hard to believe that it's already been a year," Emily commented, intertwining her fingers with Richard's. Richard nodded, his eyes scanning the renewed property. "Sometimes it seems like it was yesterday, other times it seems like a lifetime ago." He turned to Emily, his eyes shining with love and gratitude. "You know, I spent 15 years trapped in this house, unable to move or speak. But now, for the first time, I truly feel free here." Emily smiled, feeling her heart expand with love. "And what do you plan to do with that freedom, Mr. Morgan?" Richard smiled back, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "Well, Miss Adams, I have a few ideas." He knelt down, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. Emily gasped, tears immediately springing to her eyes. "Emily," Richard began, his voice choked with emotion, "you gave me back my life, my freedom, and my future. But more than that, you gave me something I never knew was missing. A true and unconditional love. Would you accept me as your husband, to share together all the adventures that life has to offer?" With tears freely flowing down her face, Emily pulled Richard up and kissed him passionately. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. As they embraced, the sound of applause erupted around them. Turning, surprised, they saw Charles, Dr. Henry, Mrs. Clara, and several other friends they had made. Throughout their journey, all smiling and celebrating. "You planned this?" Emily asked, laughing through the tears. Richard shrugged, smiling widely. "I had a little help. After all, I spent 15 years unable to plan anything. I had to make up for it." The celebration that followed was full of joy, love, and promises for the future. The Morgan mansion, once a place of dark secrets, now echoed with laughter and happiness. Later that night, when the party finally ended and the last guests departed, Emily and Richard returned to the porch. The night sky was dotted with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers from the garden. "So, future Mrs. Morgan," Richard said softly, embracing Emily from behind, "any regrets?" Emily turned in his arms, looking deeply into his eyes. "None," she replied with conviction. "Every moment, every challenge, every fear, and every joy. Everything brought us here, and there's no place in the world I'd rather be." They kissed under the starry sky, their hearts full of love and hope for the future. Their journey had been long and difficult, full of unexpected twists and seemingly insurmountable challenges, but together they had triumphed over adversity, proving that true love and determination can overcome even the darkest obstacles. As the night advanced, Emily and Richard remained embraced, contemplating the future that awaited them. A bright future, full of possibilities, built on the foundations of trust, courage, and unconditional love that they had forged in their extraordinary journey. And so, under the soft glow of the stars, a new chapter of their lives began. A chapter of hope, of healing, and of eternal love. The nightmare had ended, and the dream, their shared dream, was just beginning. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Richard's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. You can find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and love. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're eager to read your comments and know what you thought of this incredible journey of overcoming and love.